Hi dear learners, Mr. Pourroy here. I'm going to teach you today about gametes and fertilization. Now this is found within the topic human reproduction. First, let's remind ourselves of the basics of sexual reproduction. Alright, so in the case of sexual reproduction, we know that we need two parents, isn't it? So we basically have a male and a female parent. Now what's interesting is, during sexual reproduction, we know one key process is that the parents will produce sex cells, which are basically specialized cells, and these are known as gametes. In case of humans, the male will produce the gamete. Basically, the male gamete is the sperm cell, and the female gamete is the egg cell. Now, what makes these cells special? They're special because they're described as haploid. Now, let's remind ourselves, haploid means they have only half of the amount of genetic material compared to the parents, right? That's what haploid means, okay, compared to their parent cells, So in case of humans, the parent cells, what's the number of chromosomes in a normal body human cell? It's 46, right? So in both the male, the father, and the female, the mother, their body cells have 46 chromosomes. However, during the production of gametes, that number of chromosomes, that is the gametes that are formed, will have only half of the number of chromosomes. So the case sperm cell will have only 23 chromosomes, and the egg cells will have only 23 chromosomes. And just for you to know, the process that allows a body cell to divide to produce gametes, that is haploid cell, it's called meiosis. So this is something that we're going to study a bit more later. Now that you know how gametes are formed, and they're basically haploid, they have only half of the amount of genetic material, basically then, afterward, during sexual reproduction, what happens is these gametes, the male gamete and the female gametes, will fuse together, and more precisely, it's the nucleus of the sperm cell will fuse with the nucleus of the egg cell, and this fusion of the nuclei is called fertilization. So here's the definition of fertilization. As you can see, it's the fusion of the nuclei of the male gamete, which is basically the sperm cell, and of the female gamete, the nucleus of the female gamete. And what we need to know is, where does fertilization occur in humans? It occurs within the oviduct. So the oviduct is basically the site where fertilization occurs. And within the oviduct, obviously you have the ovary here. The ovary will release an egg, and that egg will move along the oviduct, and potentially, if there's an egg and there are sperm cells available, fertilization can occur in the oviduct. And the resulting cell, as you can see, is called a zygote. So the zygote is basically the fertilized egg. And this zygote, what's interesting, you can see, it has 46 chromosomes. By the way, so since gametes are described as haploid, the cells having the two sets of chromosomes, like whether it's the body cell or the zygote, they're described as diploid. All right? Diploid. Now, that's super interesting. That's why it explains why there is genetic variation. Because, as you can see, the zygote inherits genetic material from both the male and the female. That's why the genetic makeup will be unique. Later on, the zygote will keep dividing to form a ball of cells, which is called the embryo. And the embryo, over the course of development, later on the cells will keep dividing. Some of the cells will differentiate and will basically get a fetus. All right, interesting. Now, gametes have adaptations to increase the chances of fertilization and also the successful development of an embryo. So let's study the sperm cell in more detail. Now, the sperm cell has several adaptive features. Let's have a look. For example, first you have the sperm cell has a tail, as you can see, and it is called the flagellum. Now, its job is to allow the sperm cell to swim, basically, towards the egg cell. So the flagellum will move back and forth, and this will cause the sperm cell to move. The next adaptation that the sperm cell has, you can see it has this head region here. And what's interesting is, within the head region, you can see there is a structure that basically contains enzyme, and this structure is known as the acrosome. Now, the acrosome, it contains enzymes. So just note that it contains digestive enzymes, and these enzymes will digest the jelly coat that surrounds the jelly coat and the cell membrane of the egg cell. We're going to have a look at this later. So that's the acrosome. And you can see even in the head region, you have the nucleus that contains the genetic material. And then another adaptation is, you can see in the midpiece, there are many mitochondria. Respiration that occurs in the mitochondria. The energy that is released will be basically supply to the tail that will allow the tail to move back and forth, that will ultimately cause the sperm cell to move. So just to remind ourselves, the adaptation, sperm cells have a tail that allows it to swim. The head section has a region called the acrosome. It's a vesicle that contains digestive enzymes, and these will break through the coat, the jelly coat, and the cell membrane of the egg cell. And it has a lot of mitochondria, which basically the site for respiration, that ultimately will release energy that's going to be fed to the tail, that will allow the tail to move. So this is a real picture of a microscopic image of a sperm cell. So you can see that it has this long tail, so which we describe as the flagellum, and it has this the head here, which basically inside the head you have the nucleus, and you have a region called the acrosome. Just remind yourself that the acrosome. Now, on the other hand, you have the egg cell, and it has many adaptive features. Let's have a look at them. So first, you'll notice that the egg cell has a cell membrane, right? And that cell membrane is further covered by another layer, right? So this whole layer is like the jelly coat. Now, this jelly coat, what's interesting is after fertilization, it changes, its property changes. In the sense, after fertilization, the jelly coat becomes impenetrable, thereby preventing other sperm cells, right, other sperm nuclei from entering the cell. So just note that the jelly coat, its property changes after fertilization. So property changes after fertilization, right? So this is something that you have to remember. Okay, so you have the jelly coat that basically changes property after fertilization, and inside the cytoplasm it contains a store of energy, and this energy is used for dividing, for the zygotes to divide after fertilization. So two major adaptation: the jelly coat on the outside, it changes after fertilization, and secondly, inside the cytoplasm it has an energy storage, and that energy that is stored is used by the dividing zygote after fertilization. So let's compare the sperm cell and the egg cell. So first, let's talk about motility. So the ability for the gamete to move. In case of the egg cell, they are non-motile, because you can see they don't have any flagellum, so they're non-motile. Whereas in the case of a sperm cell, because they have this flagellum, which by the way gets energy from the mitochondria, they can move back and forth, so that allows the sperm cell to move. So one comparison is the motility. Next is, let's talk about the size. In the case of the egg cell, what you must know is the egg cell, basically the ovum, is the largest cell in the human body. Okay, it's almost visible. It's 0.1 millimeter. That amounts to about 100 micrometer. Okay, so we can to a certain extent see the egg cell. Whereas on the other hand, sperm cells are microscopic. They are only 45 micrometer, so they're very, very small in comparison. Next, let's talk about the structure. Another comparison is that the egg cell tends to be round, and it has, a few, adaptations, and it's basically covered with like a jelly coating, isn't it? And that's pretty much what the egg cell is about. Of course, there are other things, but in comparison to the sperm cell, it has few structural adaptation. Whereas the sperm cell, it has a head region, and it has a flagellum, and has many structural adaptation because it's moving, etc. It has an acrosome and things of that sort. So next, let's talk about the numbers. egg cells, there are thousands of immature eggs in each ovary, but only one egg is released each month. So during the menstrual cycle, only one egg cell is released in 1 month. On the other hand, if we look at the sperm cells, they are produced in very large number on a daily basis. About 100 million of sperm cells are produced in 24 hours. So these are the different comparisons that you can make between the egg cell and the sperm cell. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.